I would like to dive into the Expropriation Act. You know, the act that our President Cyril Ramaphosa hurriedly passed into law in January of this year, and which the government has been at pains to tell the whole world that the thing we call the Expropriation Without Compensation Act is in fact not an Expropriation Without Compensation Act. Obviously, we know that President Donald Trump and many people overseas have taken issue with the Expropriation Act. But I really want to have another look at it because things have gone a little bit quiet and I'm not comfortable with us being quiet about the Act. So let's look at the two controversial sides to this. Now, firstly, we've got to say that every country has some form of Expropriation Act. It's a necessary thing. If you decide you're going to build a dam, massive dam, you're going to put up this thing and the water's going to rise and there's going to be properties around the dam that need to be taken away in order that we have this dam that can then give water to millions of people. Well, you expropriate land, and every country has got this on their books. There are two things that are unique about South Africa's Expropriation Act. Now, firstly, our Expropriation Act prior to this was the one passed in 1975, which immediately would make some people think that it was some kind of apartheid legislation. Yes, it was passed in that era, but it was in line with what happens everywhere else in the world. This Expropriation Act has got two extra little bullets. For starters, there is the issue around compensation. They have included something which no Expropriation Act has got, which is called nil compensation. I love that. Nil compensation. In other words, they can just take your land for no money. And then every other Expropriation Act in the world you have to really explain why you're taking it. So in other words, if you're building that dam that I spoke about, fairly easy to explain that we are building a dam, millions of people need to get water, it's going to take over this land, these houses. I know, for example, in the Kariba Dam, there's even an old airport at the bottom of that dam. But in the good of the people, you expropriate the land, pretty clear cut, it's in everybody's interest. And the process normally would be you go and assess what the property is worth and you pay the person that owned that land whatever the assessment price of that property is. That's what you have in every country. In America, it's called eminent domain. Never understand why Americans find these strange terms for things. But it's an Expropriation Act where the country, the state, needs land for a specific reason. So they take private property using this act. Now, understand that our Expropriation Act talks about property, and property is a loaded term. Property, we say, hey guys, property, and we're all thinking farms. Well, property is also your car. It's also your television set. It's your property. This act makes no distinction. This isn't about land. This is about property. So in other words, they could take your property for nil compensation. They could take your property in the public interest. Apparently the fail-safe here, the protection that you have under this act, is you can go to court. You can go to court and say, this is unfair. They said it's in the public interest, but it's not in the public interest. And this is meant to keep us all very calm. Because, of course, judges are wonderful. But you might have to answer in front of Judge John Slope. Or how about that judge that was drunk and drove into the house all those years ago? Or what about the judge right now who's been accused of sexually harassing his assistant? You know, there's judges, they're also humans. What is the process to appoint judges? Judges are appointed by the Judicial Service Commission. We see it on television from time to time. Who appoints the Judicial Service Commission? Politicians. We saw Julius Malema raise race as a reason not to appoint certain judges. So in other words, a judge is also somebody who is appointed by a politician. So they're not stupid. They know who is signing their check at the end of the month. And it's a government check. So in other words, they work for the state. I don't know just how impartial judges will be. Of course, a lot of people have in mind when we talk about Expropriation Act, the white farmer with those khaki shirts with different pockets, right? No, this act doesn't discriminate on race. It may be the white farmer today, but tomorrow it could be anybody. So understand that you may have a vision in mind of some guy who owns 10 farms and we're going to take away 2 of his farms because we don't feel he's using them. You may not see yourself in that vision, but you may want to own a house one day and the government could take that away from you. So let's look at some of the economic effects, because I just, recently what triggered this is I was just thinking of some of the great stupidities about this act. For starters, it's an economic killer. It's a killer of the economy, and we will never get international investment. Why would you go invest in a country? Imagine if you had loads of money and you had 2 options that you can invest in 2 countries. One where you can buy property and build your factory and own your factory and everything is protected by law, or another where the state can take it away from you. Where are you most likely to invest? Okay, even China, so-called communist country, protects property rights. We have undermined property rights, so we're not going to get any international investment. But you as a local, why would you invest in this economy? Would you go and buy a farm if you think that there's a chance it might be expropriated? Or would you go and spend millions and millions in building a factory if you think that someday some politician might eye that out and say, you know what, in the public interest, we might just take that. We might just like that industry for ourselves. In actual fact, it turns out that, somebody I know may want that factory. You may buy a house with a wonderful sea view, only to find out that a politician's son-in-law has got a mansion right behind you and you're blocking his view. Next thing, in the public interest, your house is being expropriated for nil compensation. I mean, I know these are very, very sort of extreme examples, but hey, stuff happens. So that's just, the broad strokes. And of course, the politicians will poo-poo this. We've had them on the State of the Nation where they say, don't go and be emotional about it. This is an act and we will use it appropriately. Well, maybe you will, but who knows who wins the next election? Maybe they won't be that good at applying this particular act. I want to know, do you think Expropriation Act might not just undermine rates and taxes? We all pay rates and taxes. How are your rates and taxes set? Well, they're set according to the valuation of your house or your flat or something. That's what determines the valuation. Well, surely this act is putting the value of everything at nil, because there's a chance that your house could be taken for nil, or that apartment block could be taken for nil, or your office block could be taken for nil. Therefore, surely rates and taxes should be set at a valuation of nil. Be very interesting to find out what the lawyers think of that. Then I want to tackle one of the much vaunted great ideas with the Expropriation Act, and that's that we hear this, these guys who can't, 7 out of 10 of our metros are dysfunctional, according to the Auditor's General Report, which came out recently. 7 out of 8. 7 out of 8. Only Cape Town got a clean audit. The other 7 are dysfunctional. And one of the big problems that this act is meant to solve is that problem of hijacked buildings. What happens? How does a building get hijacked? This is a South African term. If you're watching from overseas, just listen and learn. What happens in South Africa? I own a building. Let's just say a building is owned. The next thing, people literally come into your building. They shouldn't be there. And they literally start living in your building. They take over your building. And very quickly, word gets out on the street. South Africa is a place with a lot of homelessness. Word gets out on the street that that building, you can get inside there, and in actual fact, what starts happening is a whole business forms around it where a criminal syndicate takes over your building and starts renting out rooms to people that are desperate for accommodation. Okay, so what would you do if you owned that building and it got invaded? Well, you'd do the logical thing. You'd go to the police, right, and say, my building's been hijacked. 100 people descended on my building last week, and please come and help me, policeman. Well, if you think that you would do this, do you not think that the previous owners of those hijacked buildings didn't try that as well? They also phoned the police. And what did the police do? Absolutely nothing. So the building got hijacked. Now, according to this act, that building can get expropriated. Okay, so now you're creating a bit of a perverse incentive. Why not organize this completely? So I've got a nice high-rise building. If you're a criminal syndicate, you get hold of 100 desperate people and you say, right, guys, on Thursday night, we're going to open the door and you all guys go pile in and make yourselves at home. I go to the police. Police, has been a hijacking of my buildings, 100 people inside there, turning this place into a mess. Do you think the police are going to do anything that they haven't been doing for the last 30 years, which is nothing? Of course they're going to do nothing. They're in fact now incentivized to do nothing because now the building has been hijacked. Now it can be expropriated. What happens once a building is expropriated? It becomes property of the state. The state can do one of two things. They can fix it up, keep it as a state-owned building, and I don't know, do whatever states do with buildings. Or they could sell it. So now the building that I built, that I owned, that was worth 50 million rand, I'm selling it after it's been expropriated for 5 million rand. Well, it turns out it's that same politician's son-in-law that's buying my 50 million rand building for 5 million rand. Perverse incentive. Why would the police do their job? Why would the city fathers look after the area? They can't, because they get ownership of it. The more you damage the thing, the more likely you are to own it. So there's a perverse incentive. So remember I said that if you expropriate the building, it belongs to the state. Well, just remember, in August of 2023, there was a building in Johannesburg called Usinduzu. And this building was owned by the Johannesburg City Council. And it was hijacked. And eventually the building caught fire and 70-something people died. Terrible tragedy. Now imagine if you went and expropriated that building. Who are you expropriating from? So the state is going to expropriate buildings from the state. This is the level of crazy we have got to in South Africa. If we think this is going to help the economy of South Africa grow, I've got a bridge to sell you. Man, I don't know where we are heading, but this Expropriation Act, the more you look into it and the more you think about it, the more ridiculous it becomes. I'll tell you what isn't ridiculous, and that is Pace Car Rental. Great little company. You can rent a car and get a discount there. Use the code SONA and get a 10% discount. And if you haven't subscribed to the State of the Nation yet, do it in a hurry. We're on the road to 100,000. We'll see you again soon. This has been my opinion.